So I'm Michael Williams. I am the Senior Coordinator for Program Development and Special Projects at the 1199 Child Care Funds. And throughout the years of work, I've been able to maintain and find economic security. Although looking back and keeping in touch with some of my friends from growing up, we haven't all reached the same place. I went to a very small high school. I went to a high school with no more than 500, 600 students. My graduating class was about 100 people, which is pretty small for New York City standards. And we, for a public school, had a lot of resources in terms of guidance counselors, college visits, college fairs. I felt very well versed from my school on what should happen. I always had a thirst for education, which I think was a big help for me sort of becoming successful and wanting to change. It gave me the ability to sort of change not just my outlook, but actually change my position in life. Being sort of a smart kid in class allowed you opportunities that others didn't have. And I realized that very early. I realized that if I was smart, I'd get the opportunities, the little bit of opportunities that were available to the kids inside of my neighborhood. What ended up happening is I and a select few others in the South Bronx, or at least in my high school, or in whatever program that I had the opportunity to participate in, got all of the resources. All of them. When I went to Student Leadership Council, it was the same kids. When I went to debate, it was the same kids. When I went on field trips, it was the same kids. And I wish that we had been taught to sort of advocate for our community and for ourselves more, so that we were able to not leave the community, but to find more resources for, my colleagues, I guess, to call them my comrades, but for my peers, for the other students that I went to school with. My mother is a single mother, and while I was in high school, she went to college while working 3 jobs and had 4 kids. And it motivated me in so many different ways. The first is and to this day, I never really feel like there's something that I can complain about. Like there's nothing that really feels too much for me, because I've had like a really good example and role model of a person who can sort of take on the world and come out to be really successful. She also motivated me to pushed into my mind that I also deserved more, that if I worked hard that I could also achieve it like she did, or other family members have. My neighborhood at the time, interestingly enough, it's Sobro now, but at the time it wasn't Sobro. It was extremely impoverished. I remember having a lot of neighbors who had come from single family homes. Down the block from where I lived was a drug treatment center. In fact, a bunch of drug treatment centers that my mother officially started working at. And it was really tough, even being someone who had gone to college. It was really tough trying to get my brothers to understand at the time, when they were ready to apply, what all this meant. It was a cram session that it was really hard to teach. It became really difficult, and they also became very uninterested because it was like almost a brain overload. It was like, I can't take all this in about the 3 months that you need me to do this before I actually apply. A lot of my friends didn't go on to go to school. They work, and this is what they would describe it as, but they work at things that they consider to be dead-end jobs, jobs that are not necessarily careers, that are not necessarily things that allow them to work towards their passion. And while I fell into many jobs, they've always spoke to who I was. I always felt that I was working for something that was greater than myself, but also helping others. I think a better, not a better question, but an idea of what showed me sort of the disparity between sort of a school that I went to and another school. So I debated with a whole bunch of students who went to high schools all throughout the Bronx, and some didn't have a guidance counselor. They didn't know who their guidance counselor was, whereas starting in 9th grade, I had to meet with my guidance counselor. In fact, I still keep in touch with my high school guidance counselor too. Interestingly enough, a lot of the same people that I grew up with in the South Bronx still live in the South Bronx, still live in the same neighborhood, which I think is a great thing, but at the same time, they feel stuck there. They feel like that's actually where they will be for the rest of their lives. And sometimes when I speak to them and we have conversations, they talk a lot about like, man, you made it, you got out, you know, I wish I would have done this, and I wish I would have gone to college. And a lot of times when I was growing up, a lot of people around me, the same people that helped me find opportunities, that made sure that I got the resources that others didn't, always talked about success in terms of leaving the neighborhood. There was always this magical world outside of the South Bronx that if you just worked hard enough that you would explore, and when you leave the South Bronx, everything would be okay. You'd move to a better neighborhood. The resources that weren't plentiful here would be found in someplace else, almost like they were like growing on trees. And no matter how successful I get, or I've gotten, or I get in the future, it always just seems a little unfair that others didn't have the opportunity to have the same resources and need different things. And I think when we start to push children and like young adults into boxes, they that may not be for them. It's harder for them to get out of those boxes. I wish we had a lot more opportunity to really figure out who kids are and allow them some agency to decide where they want to go. And I think we'd be pretty surprised at what they come up with.